Hello and welcome to this 300 level course at fxphd. We have been preparing a shooting for getting the footage we are going to use during the course. I'm with Mike Seymour at Stiller Studios in Stockholm, Sweden. We are aiming to get all the material that is going to serve for this course and other courses, because Mike is going to be also covering the background fundamentals and other things for you. But I'm here just to make sure that we are going to get everything we need for the course, covering two main areas, which is motion control cameras and high speed combined, and deep image compositing. Of course, we are going to discuss other subjects on the course, but mainly I'm going to focus on Nuke, the pipeline, and how to get the images to look really, really good. Matt Lerner is going to help us getting assets for adding volumetrics and fluids and other CG elements into the image. The nice thing of having this opportunity to be during the shooting is just we are going to get all the stuff we need, and I'm going to show you how to capture everything you need in terms of compositing. I'm not going to focus on the supervision in terms of visual effects, but I'm going to make sure that we get all we need for the compositing. Well, welcome. I hope you enjoyed this class. So let me introduce you a bit of what we are going to discuss in terms of compositing. So the first thing is to have the great opportunity to work with the Cyclops, which is this motion control rig that is behind me. It's great to have motion control when you are shooting. It's something that you don't get that often. The nice thing is that is going to allow us to repeat the same kind of movement every time to create like something that we do in CG every time, which is multipass. But this time we are going to use the multipass in terms of multi-shooting. So we are going to shoot the same scene different times. So we can combine them together and create something that you cannot do in real life. So we have a project, and that project is going to be to shoot a commercial about a skateboard. So we have one of the best skateboarders in the world that is going to work with us just to get around 7 to 8 shots. And we have been designing everything, and Mike is going to tell you in his course about how to get all the projects in terms of the pitch and the design of the shooting. But for us, just having the opportunity to work with motion control cameras like the Cyclops, which is behind me right now, is going to allow us to create different takes with the exact same movement of the camera, frame accurate. So we can create, in terms of images from the camera, the same as you get when you are creating multipass CG. So we are going to separate elements. But this time, instead of getting just the lights, we are going to get different elements. So that is just one aspect of the course. So aside of using the very cool rigs for motion control, we are going to explore also the deep image compositing to approach especially one of the shots that we are going to include volumetrics. So we are going to use a light that is going to cast volumetrics, and we are going to have a live action character passing through the volumetrics. So for that, we are going to understand how the deep image compositing can help to accomplish what we want to get. Of course, we are going to understand the deep image compositing before to start working with it from a theoretical point of view, and then we are going to move into the actual practice of the deep image comp. Just for getting a good understanding of the whole process, we are going to compare the 3D, let's say, deep image compositing approach to the traditional 2D approach. So you can understand by yourself what is better and what is worse for each work, because it's not guaranteed that it's going to be like the full solution of everything. Of course, you are going to get tools that you cannot get in the traditional way. So we are going to create both setups, and we are going to compare both of them. And another good point that we have for being here at Stiller Studios is that the guys here has a very cool pipeline for Nuke for interacting with the Cyclops and all the lenses and cameras that they have mounted. So we are going to understand a bit how they use Nuke in this pipeline and how they accomplish things that are sometimes not that expensive, but yes, time expensive, like lens distortion. So they encode the lens distortion together with the movement of the camera, so they can recreate movement within the movement of an image. So it's actually something more than just camera tracking or motion control. It's the combination of the features of Nuke together with the motion control. So we are going to have a chat with the guys in here, and they are going to tell you about a bit of the secrets of getting the pipeline and how they create themselves the interaction with the Cyclops. So now Mike is going to explain you everything about the commercial itself. So you are going to have a good understanding of the project, and you are going to understand shot by shot what we are going to do. So see you in a bit.
Well, thanks, Victor. And I've got to say, I'm really enthusiastic to be here with Victor. Of course, he's incredibly talented, as are the guys here at Stiller Studios. So as he said, those three main areas are things that we'll be looking at, and I'm really looking forward to him putting together the new comps. Plus that last one is kind of, you get the magic of not only Victor doing amazing stuff, but of course the guys here who have got that pipeline that he referred to, which is just extraordinary between what's going on in the rig and what's happening right on their screens in Nuke. Okay, so let me just run through the commercial now that we're going to be having a look at, so you've got an idea what's going on. We actually started this with Moon Unit, and we actually produced a pitch, and I was the director. And so the idea was I sort of put together what at that stage was a Nike commercial. And the idea was that we'd produce a Nike commercial to promote the brand and perhaps their Instagram account. And so we just had a really cool, authentic, kind of street cred piece. Put that together, that was stage one. You can see that today if you want, either in our forums or it's of course still on fxguide.com. Moon Unit did a great job, it was sensationally great, and from that we then did a course last term, which is repeated this term, which is on the previs. And so we prevised that shot up. Now, as reality would have it, we prevised it up not realizing that we'd have the kind of resources that Victor was referring to here. 2 motion control rigs from Bolt ones, and then 1 Cyclops motion control rig, which is extraordinary. I mean, this is like unbelievable. The Cyclops alone is like 4.5 tons, and these suckers move incredibly quickly. So, you know, really dangerous, but magnificent pieces of cinema tools. Okay, so we've got all this stuff. We didn't know we had it in the previs, so we're now going from the previs, which is what could happen in real life. You've got this, and then it changes a little as you go in to the final piece that you actually film. So we're going to still basically have the same idea as the previs, and then we're going to have the new piece. So let's look at the previs now, and then I'll explain the difference.
Some people want me to be head so down. You know your body drives you insane. Only because you know that you want to feel the same. You know your body drives you insane. What you want, what you want.
Okay, so I wanted to run through some of the parameters of the elements that we're going to be coming up with. We're not going to be, of course, doing a lot of the Nuke stuff straight out of the gate in this first class. We're going to be setting stuff up for you and showing you things from the shoot, and then Victor will be picking that up in the latter classes. But most of it's going to be Victor. Of course, I'm just going to be doing this early sequence. And I wanted to explain how the skateboarding stuff was put together, because it's important to understand the role of someone supervising on set. I was effectively directing and I guess supervising. Victor was also helping, of course, with that as the lead compositor, but he was also having to speak in Spanish because our skateboarder couldn't speak English particularly well, couldn't speak Swedish particularly well, but luckily Spanish was a language that Victor and he could share and understand, and so Victor was explaining a lot of the work that was required. So the things that we wanted out of the skateboarding sequence from the outset, from the previs, was to have it working in such a way that we would just get some really dramatic shots. We weren't necessarily after stunt work in the sense that we weren't after the most spectacular skateboarding thing ever. What we were after was shots made magnificent by the virtue of the slow motion and the fact that the slow motion is being shot by the camera moving very quickly. To give you an idea of the range of options we had available to us, we had to pick a frame rate. Now, the base rate was 24 frames a second, and so everything, as you'll hear in some of the interviews we do, is based off that base. So we didn't shoot, say, 1,000 frames a second. We shot whatever the multiple was, which was 900 and whatever it was, 96 or whatever it was. That was a multiple of 24, so it would scale easily. We learnt our lesson from The Martian, which of course was Ridley Scott's film, and they were trying to shoot stuff in stereo there on the Reds at like 32 frames. They shot it at 48 because they couldn't sync at 32 and it caused retiming issues. We thought, let's keep it simple. If we want to retime stuff to speed, we should have it just as a simple multiple, and then we won't have to do an optical flow. We can just do a frame knockout. Sounds like a simple point, but if you're on set and you can get those things correct, it's going to make life a lot easier. Suddenly, a shot that is at normal speed is just an edit. We don't have to do anything with optical flow or anything else. Now, it's not that hard to do optical flow these days, of course, in Nuke, but it does save time if you're having to do anything else and fix stuff up. We wanted to avoid this being a roto course, so we tried to do as much of it as possible in camera with a good background. So, in fact, the opening sequences where our skateboarder throws down the board is, in fact, meant to be as if we're looking to camera right, and then he's going across to camera left, but in reality we were actually looking at 90 degrees because it gave us this lovely rusty side of the studios at Stella. Luckily, I have some great drone footage to show you. This is footage showing you the layout of the set, and this is from Johannes, who's a very long time fxphd supporter, and he's shot drone footage for us on the Tuesday, which was the shoot where we had most of the material for the skateboarding. And as you can see in these shots here, we've got primarily our big lights off to the left and right, giving us our primary backlight, but we did have fill. Even when it was quite dark, we had quite strong lighting, as in 10Ks, because as we go up in multiples of high speed, we lose a stop each time. So again, an obvious thing to think about when you're on set supervising high speed is you are going to need light. We don't want to push the ISO on the cameras and get noise. And so as you go from, if I could just round up the numbers for a second, from 24 to 25, as I go from 25 to 50, I have one stop, to 100 becomes two stops, 200 becomes three, 400 becomes four stops. We were shooting around 500, so that's about 4.5 stops difference. Of course, if we went up to 1,000, we're about 6 or 7 stops down. Now, 6 or 7 stops is an enormous amount of light loss to be having on set, but of course, that's just how fast it runs when you're running at 1,000 frames a second. We didn't go above those numbers on the material that we shot, the skateboarder, for the Nuke 300 course, though I will say that outside this course, we did shoot some other stuff that was up at 1,500, and then we crop into the sensor. The other thing to remember is that the files that we're shooting are 4K, so we knew we could punch into them a bit in post. We expected that our finishing master was going to be like 1920 by 1080, and that we'd be giving you the files. But you know, it's nice to have the 4K. Not only does it give you higher fidelity on what you're doing, but as I say, if we wanted to blow up a shot or move in on it, we knew that we could. So we made the decision for the 4K. We stuck with it. That gave us a full frame, which gave us a good shallow depth of field that we wanted. We tried to keep the light levels up with 10K lighting, so we had 10Ks at the back, some of which were very much spot type 10Ks, so we could get some real length to those throws. And then we also put some smoke and other elements in, knowing that we'd be enhancing those as part of this course and that we'd be adding other elements. But we had some experience where we shot some other stuff with smoke, and the smoke was really problematic shot to shot. So while we had some in these shots, we tried to back it off rather than overblow it, because we knew we could always add more, and that was a valid part of this course. Taking it away, however, is a much, much bigger problem. So we have the cameras shooting, and they're shooting at high speed, and to do the math on that, I've done it on the f-stop. If we do the math on the timing now, it's pretty simple. As a rule of thumb, if you're shooting 1,000 frames a second, it's 1/40th of real time. So we're shooting a TVC. So if we're shooting at 1,000 frames a second, 1 second of footage is already longer than the entire TVC that we're kind of aiming at. for aiming at a 30-second spot. Even if we make it a 60-second spot, you're talking about a second and a half, which is not much, and that's the entire spot gone. So it was pretty apparent right out of the gate that we'd have to do ramping. We'd be ramping the shots between fast and slow. I think that's a cool look, but again, on set, I've been in a situation where people have been very fussy about a shot and how it runs, and unless you're doing the ramping, you are just not going to have that much of a shot. So what we're talking about at at 1,000 frames a second is that you probably want, 1/20th of a second, that'd be a couple of seconds, which is the average time for kind of a shot in a TVC, hardly anything, right? So it was very easy for people to say, oh, we want to get the beginning where he jumps on the skateboard and the end where he leaps up, and I'm like, there's no way we're holding that as one shot unless we're ramping, because it would just be way longer than the whole spot. So the premise comes from our previs. He comes, he jumps, he skids, and goes across the, what we don't know then is the logo. He lands, turns around and comes back, and we reveal the logo. What changed between pre-production and the final shoot is that we changed the logo. We went from being a Nike commercial to being a commercial for Tip, because those guys came on board and happily provided our Brazilian skater and, for that matter, the ramp rig. And the other thing that changed is that when that happened, I said, well, some of these shots are sneaker focused in the Nike script. We need them now to be board focused. So instead of starting with shots of his shoes, which is what happened in the previs, I suggested or dictated, I guess, that we start with a shot of the board. And I came up with the idea that he would flick the board up and he would toss the board in slow motion. And in fact, the rotating board going through the air is a really good product shot if you're selling skateboards. It's a product shot that shows the board in sort of 3 dimensions, but if you think about it, it doesn't actually scream product shot. The other thing, of course, we did is then focus on the board and him standing on it, as opposed to him running and then getting on the board. And so that opening sequence was kind of rejigged to emphasize the board. Now, when we did our initial idea with the previs, which was terrific and we loved it to death and we learnt a lot about the spot, we didn't have the idea of having pyrotechnics and explosion. But I thought that given that we'd gone so heavily into the slow-mo and stuff, that we needed to sort of get a bit more oomph into the spot. So we came up with this idea of having petrol bombs go off behind our skateboarder. And so we had 2 takes of our skateboarder at the end of his travel, jumping and leaping. You'll note that the board isn't in shot when he goes into the leap, so we don't have a continuity problem in fact, you can't actually go from sideways on the travelling shot to around and jumping while rotating the board. At least I don't think you can do that unless you're some kind of a genius skateboarder. But we solved the problem by him coming up into frame and rotating the board. He then lands, and again in a deviation from what was actually, I guess, articulated explicitly, he doesn't land on a wet surface. We decided that was too dangerous, so he lands on a dry surface. And in fact, what happens then is we're going to got a wet pass and we're going to mix the wet pass with the dry pass. So he lands in the same place. It's a motion control move, but because it's a motion control move, it moves effortlessly and matches up. So that gives us our sequence. We now have to turn him around and come back. Because we've done some pyro and exploded a bomb effectively behind him, I thought it would be fun to have a little bit more of that. And so we actually fitted flint to the end of his skateboard. So when he stops having landed and theoretically turns around to come back for the final run, he's putting sparks out the back of his board because the flint is actually being dragged along the ground. And again, we travel along and up from his board up to him on that shot. And then we go for the end top shot. Was going to be a spiral out, but we decided that from the drone footage, it looked so cool being high and locked off and graphic that we would do that as a lock-off shot. And so that final shot of the logo where he rides across, jumps and freezes was in fact done as a effectively locked-off camera hanging off the side of the building. So we moved the whole logo a bit closer to the building, cleared out everything else in terms of the motion control rigs, and then stuck an arm out over the roof of the studio and filmed him going across. And I think that works well. I think it's a nice, easy to read end graphic. And as you'll know, if you've done a lot of commercials work, people really want to read that logo. You can't resolve the logo at the end of a 3-second logo resolve and then cut to black. It has to resolve with enough time, normally 2.5 seconds, that you can take in the logo. And so we sort of need to have the shot kind of static for a couple of seconds And I thought by the time we spun and came up and then held for a couple of seconds, it would be a bit dull. But if we had it just locked off there and he just rode across it and jumped, that we'd get our 3 seconds in for our end tag, and that's what we did. So that's basically the structure of the ad. So one of the things I wanted to get you guys to have a look at is our discussion I had with some of the crew on the shoot so that you get an insight. And of course, one of the most important people for us as visual effects supervisors and visual effects people is the DOP. Marcus is an Australian, really great guy, and I wanted to bring you this section of my interview with him as he discusses some of the issues around motion control in the broader context, just to kind of feed our understanding of the issues at hand. Thanks so much for joining us. Man, I've been having fun here at Stella. It's great.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I think we've got some really good stuff.
So you're full-time, obviously, here.
Yep.
What, for a couple of years now?
About a year and a half, yeah. About 18 months.
So, firstly, thanks so much for inviting us over to shoot.
Not a problem, it's been fun.
Hey, so how did you approach the sort of lighting solution that you wanted to have for our skateboarder, given that, of course, we're going to lose a lot of light as we keep getting faster and faster, effectively losing f-stop?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about that was that it would look good shooting wide open, which helps us. But even still, like you said, I mean, once you're going up to about 1,000 frames a second, you're losing 5+ stops of light. So where you might normally want to be a little bit subtle and use a lot of bounce light or something like that, those options sort of are pretty limited because, of course, you sort of don't have the bullets. So essentially, we had a mole beam 10K, which we used as a sort of backlight key.
And that's kind of like a projector type lens.
Yeah, it's a projector lens, and one good thing about that is it's really efficient in terms of, I mean, you don't get a broad spread, but what you do get is the light that 10K bulb produces is in that beam. So it's exceptionally good for getting, maximum value out of your wattage at a certain point. And it's also really handy if you do want to do some soft light and get and put it through a sail, through a silk or something like that. I find them as a tungsten source very handy for that because it's sort of much more efficient than, say, a Fresnel.
By the way, were you shooting everything tungsten or?
Yes, well, everything was tungsten. Yeah, no, everything was tungsten. Largely because as soon as you start moving, even if you put a half CTB, you're losing a certain amount of light, probably about a stop. And then we need every stop we can get when you're shooting at that high speed. So everything was tungsten and a lot of hard light. Okay, so you've got this 10K coming in. How do you, I guess you just have to move him back, because I was going to say, how do you avoid the problem that we've got a skater? So inherently he's moving quite a lot. And obviously if you've got a 10K at one end, he's going to travel towards it. He's going to be gaining stops just because of inverse square. Well, actually that's a handy thing about, once again, the mole beam is because it's a projector lens, you can have it a lot further back.
Right.
Which then helps with that inverse square law because, the further back it is, the less that applies.
That is relative, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that's your main light that you were sort of
You were using that a lot just for as a sort of, because the sort of brief was a sort of very high key, almost lighting with the shadows as much as the light and making sure that we got some backlight to sort of reveal, atmospheric elements like dust or smoke. So we use that as our main sort of backlight to use as almost as an accentuating area. So he wouldn't always be in that, but he'd hit that and that would be sort of like the key moment. And then we sort of bring the other lights around to create the shape.
So did you have any kind of contrast plan in your head in terms of like a ratio between your key and your fill, or you just
do
you light to your eye? Or?
Yeah, light to my eye. Yeah, I mean, I used to, when I was shooting film before, which we sort of don't really do that much anymore. I used to sort of use the meter a lot, but then even then I stopped using it. I just use it to sort of get like a sort of a stop that I would be using to put on the camera. But in terms of the ratios, I would do that mostly by and then see what those ended up and then work out what to do with the camera. Because sometimes I think when you work too much with a meter, for me anyway, I stop looking at the picture and start looking at my meter.
But I mean, what we were looking at on the monitors is great, but of course, to our eye, we're looking at stuff that's going to be 5 stops different by the time you get the very, very short shutter.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, like, how do you kind of do that? Is that compensated for by the system? Because the actual camera itself is only rated at like what, 250, and you were looking at it at, I think, 600 or 800. Yeah,
well, basically, I mean, I sort of trust the operators when we're working with the Phantoms. Like, I'll say, look, are we in the range? Is this going to hold? Are we going to get too much noise? And I usually ask them, if I'm looking at the image and going, okay, I think this is going to push too much in the highlights. We've got too much area of shadow that needs more detail. I'll sort of just ask them because they know their cameras more than I do.
It's interesting because when I'm working with, say, a drama DP, one of the things that I really respect is that process of saying, okay, let's get the actors in, just walk the space, and then you'll work out how to light it from that, and then how to film it. But here, when we're laying tracks and we're doing stuff, it seemed like you were walking the space, if I can use that as a kind of a conceptual thing.
Absolutely.
You were doing that in our pre-production meetings. Like you were kind of mentally, I could see you doing it, right?
Yeah, right.
Because if we get down here and you lay all the track and put it in, I don't know how much it weighs, but a lot, in and rig it all up, and then go, yeah, that's not such a good shot. I mean, it's a huge ask to move it around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you've got that much machinery, the planning's everything. Like you say, it's just and also if you're thinking ahead, I mean, generally speaking, I think as a cinematographer or DOP, it's very important to think ahead anyway, because even if it's not something that's complicated, I mean, you're always going to save time by leapfrogging and going, what's happening next, even just in a normal production. But with this, of course, it's super important to know, okay, if we put the track there, is the shot going to look good? Great, that's one thing, but then also have we got room to put the lights in the places we need, and are we going to, can we get them close enough to get the light values we need, etc., etc.
One of the things that I thought was really, really nice is we're getting really nice glares and lens flares, and not lens flares for their own sake, but it gave it kind of a cold crispness that I thought was really nice with the backlight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also we're in Sweden, so cold Christmas is pretty easy to...
Crisp is what you get.
Is what you get, yeah, absolutely. But I agree, I really like that too. And I also think that, you sort of got to work with what you've got. And to a degree, we could have battled to sort of try and keep the lens flare down, but also we were using the standard speeds, area standard speeds.
And that was T2.1 you were
working T2.1, and also they're older lenses, and I think I like the way that they do flare. And then I think also when you've got something going slow motion, you need as many elements as possible to create some atmosphere. And I think when you sort of move in and out of flare and you get that sort of movement across the sort of, the lens surface, more or less, or along the focal plane, and it sort of moves and shifts in relation to the character. It's another sort of parallax thing to work in,
So one of the things also that I was really, interested to watch you do is handle explosions, because when we're obviously setting up for those, you don't have the ability of saying, hey, that looks pretty good, like with that large bloom of orange fireball hanging in the air there,
in front of that.
So you need to expose for that. You also need to expose. You don't want to have like it blow out the actor, but by the same time you want the actor to be like just well lit, and it's just a white kind of clip. So you don't have as much latitude. I mean, I think the new Phantoms are good. You don't have as much latitude as you do on a standard like Arri. How do you, is that just experience? I guess it is.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, well, if I lift it up to sort of, I mean, you sort of know roughly what fire is going to be, in your head from shooting fire before. And of course, it's going to be a bit brighter than just a, little fire you've got there. So you sort of think about that. Okay, well, and it is sort of just a feel thing for me, because, I mean, technically the best way to do it would be to, do a test explosion and all that sort of stuff. And if on a bigger production, probably that's what we would do. And we go through the test. But because we were doing stuff quite quickly and on the fly, and that was even like a last minute thing to bring in that explosion, it's just a feel thing, so which in the end worked out really well.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard, isn't it? Because what we want to get out of an explosion is we want to have some detail in the highlights. But if you make the shot look like it's going to be lit for an explosion that hasn't happened yet, you're telegraphing the thing and it doesn't fly.
And also too, I mean, an explosion is meant to be bright.
Yep.
I mean, if you it's sort of that contrasting. If you make everything so bright that, okay, it's exposed at the same level as the explosion, you actually won't see the explosion. So it's a matter of getting that balance where it's not so dark that basically you've got a black hole and then an explosion and what was happening in front of it, or having the everything lit and then the explosion blowing out to hell, and sort of the balance is in between.
I have to say the shot for me that exemplified just how high speed can plus something in terms of production value is our skateboarder flicking up his board and throwing it to camera.
Absolutely, that was your idea. It was great.
But I mean, it's standing beside him when it happened. It's a nothing shot.
Oh, it's
it was almost clumsy.
Yeah,
on screen he looked.
It's epic.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think also too, like one thing that people don't think about so much with high speed, because obviously the board itself spinning through the air was epic, but then also just somehow you can see into somebody's ideas a bit more somehow, because he's just going, I'm picking it up and throwing it, but he's thinking about something at the same time. And somehow, because we come up to him and he's concentrating on this, he knows what he's got to do. So you can see that happening. There's something about the way when you see somebody's emotions happening on their face in slow motion, there's something very interesting about that as well, which I think added to the epic nature of that shot.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he looked badass at the beginning, but standing beside him, it really, I don't want to seem in any way rude, but it just didn't seem like a very interesting shot for anyone from any point of view.
No.
And we looked on the monitor, and I was like, oh, and I remember you and I were both like clapping. It was like, yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
It is interesting how that extra dimension of time really lets something get elevated. It's like an establishing shot can sometimes really give something a real gravitas and a presence.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that in my experience here with you guys, that slow motion can really give a presence to a shot that that gives it power.
I mean, it's just another storytelling tool, really, but it can be really powerful for certain, to communicate certain things that you can't in other ways, I think.
Well, absolutely. Anyway, it's been an absolute joy being filming with you here. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from you.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be looking through the edits, starting to give you out material, and also outlining some of the other things we did, including a bunch of effects passes, but that's all coming up next week when Victor and I return with our Nuke 300 course. Thanks so much, guys.